Okay, can everyone see the screen? You should be able to see a little presentation. Okay, fantastic. Okay, let's quickly talk about what we have in store for today's webinar. A couple of you actually joined for yesterday's webinar, which is awesome. We basically split it into two now on day one. So yesterday we were talking about the Live and the Perform program. The reason we group those two groups together is that those two groups are peaking for the CrossFit Open. The Live group is peaking for trying to do the CrossFit Open scaled, and the Perform group is trying to complete the CrossFit Open RX. So it made sense to categorize and put those two together. Today, we're talking about our compete and elite programs. And if you're not on the process, which I don't think applies to anyone here, then really what we're saying is this is for people who are targeting to try and be at their very best for the quarterfinals or the semifinals, or maybe even the CrossFit Games. Okay, maybe you're even just targeting the CrossFit Open, but you follow the compete program or the elite program, and that's your target. A lot of these concepts are still going to apply to you. So here's what we have in store. We'll start by talking about the season roadmap. So basically, what does this 12 months look like? You know, this is always going to be a part of these presentations because I think it's a really important reminder just as to how this training cycle fits within the bigger picture. We're going to talk about the concept of peaking and training phases and how that applies to, you know, the program that we're all following. We can talk about what should I prioritize at this point in the season. I think it's a really important conversation for all of us to have, and just some reminders there. Movements that we should be preparing for. How strong do you really need to be? Question I get asked a lot in order to achieve the goals like the CrossFit Open quarterfinals or the semifinals. Each of those goals has its own unique set of metrics and things that we have to be able to do. How to work on your weaknesses following a group program. I think that's really important. I think a lot of us here will still have some weaknesses and things we need addressed. And how do we actually do that by following a group template? We'll talk a little bit about the next cycle. I'm not going to talk about it too much because on Monday, you're going to get a very lengthy post from me on What Up, which is going to talk about exactly what the new cycle is about and kind of how we're splitting up each day. So I'll save the details for that post. We'll finish by talking about making adjustments to program and how we can do that. And then we'll conclude with the power of environment. Okay, if any point in time my audio cuts off or something weird happens, just give me some hand signal so I know I should stop. You can also post your questions, comments, thoughts in the chat box, and we can get to that at the end. Ant has just taken off his shirt, which is fantastic for all of us viewers who just want a little bonus viewing. Thank you, Ant. Let's crack on. Okay, let's talk about our season map. What does a whole year look like? So the season for us started as soon as last year's quarterfinals finished. And the season will finish this year, depending on how far you progress through the Open and the quarterfinals and semis. So if your season finishes at the Open and you don't progress to quarterfinals, that will be the end of the season. If your season finishes at quarterfinals or semifinals, so on and so forth, that will dictate how long your year is. So this is what we have completed so far, guys. 3 training cycles. We started with a 12-week accumulation phase, just kind of like rebuilding our foundations. Then we went to a 6-week intensification phase. And then what we're in right now is a 3-week competition phase. The reason we call it a competition phase is because we're doing the summer throwdown, or a lot of us are taking part in the summer throwdown. And so the whole idea there was to throw a competition into the middle of the year so that we don't forget how to compete, because it's a really important thing. If we're going to do CrossFit, we do competitions, we can't just train and isolate forever. It's important we kind of throw ourselves into the ring sometimes and do some hard competitions. So that's a 3-week competition phase where the goal has been crush the summer throwdown workouts. Even if you're not doing the throwdown, you know, we still have logical training progression, so we can still get fit. And as soon as we finish this, next week, we begin our new 12-week accumulation cycle, where very similar to our very first cycle, we'll be focusing on getting strong, developing skills in isolation and under fatigue. I'll talk about that a little bit later. Let's talk about what happens after this cycle, because I think it's important to talk about the whole year. After this cycle, so on the 11th of November, we're going to move into a 7-week intensification phase. After that intensification phase, we move into CrossFit Open prep. Now, for those in our compete program, we will focus a little bit more on the CrossFit Open, but those in the elite program, or those who are targeting quarterfinals, semifinals, we're going to treat the CrossFit Open as just a training phase. So the intention there is that we're not going to be doing workouts more than once, kind of just treating it as a Saturday tester and, hopefully doing enough to progress to the next round. Again, don't worry about that too much. We've got plenty of time before we need to start thinking about that kind of stuff. Once that happens, obviously we compete in the CrossFit Open and prepare for the quarterfinals. Around about this time, so when the Open is starting, we are going to start a team training program as well as an age group training program. So if anyone is looking to go team or they have teammates lined up and they want to do things like the quarterfinals, or if people are looking to compete in the age group categories, we will be starting separate tracks around about the CrossFit Open so that people can move into those tracks. The reason we have to create another program there is that the competitions for things like the quarterfinals and semifinals for teams and age groups, the dates are all a little bit staggered. So we can't really have everyone in one program. They've all got to have their kind of individual peaking structures. And then where it kind of all concludes is we compete in the 2024 CrossFit quarterfinals around March time, mid to end of March. And post quarterfinals, for any athletes who qualify for the semifinals, we will then move you to individualized programming. So if you're an individual and you qualify to semifinals, we'll be moving you guys to an individualized training program. Very similar reasons is that semifinals all happen at different dates. So it's really important that kind of get a somewhat individualized approach to peaking you for that competition. That is the season roadmap. Let's talk about a lot of the words that I've just thrown out at you. Firstly, we're going to talk about this concept of peaking. So when we say peaking, what we mean by peaking is that the training program's goal is to prepare the athletes who follow that program for one specific time in the year. And then what we're looking for at one specific time is to get our athletes to be physically and mentally at their very best. So when we talk about the compete program, the goal of the compete program is to qualify our athletes for the quarterfinals. And what we have, our main peak is going to be the quarterfinals. So we want to be at our very best when the quarterfinals rolls around. But we also do what we call a mini peak. So basically, like, we're still going to push you hard to be pretty good, but not at your best for the CrossFit Open. Reason being, for most people in our compete program, it's not an absolute guaranteed that they're qualifying to the quarterfinals. So we still need to do a bit of prep in the Open to make sure that we're fit enough to get into the quarters, to get into the quarterfinals. So we all don't know that the quarterfinals happens pretty quickly after the Open. So for those who follow the elite program, the goal is to qualify and execute the quarterfinals and the semifinals. So the main peak there is that we want you guys to be at your very best for the semifinals. And I know that's a really, really hard thing to achieve and not many people achieve it, but that's still where the program's going to go. But we're also going to do a mini peak for the quarterfinals. So for those in the elite program, we're not going to focus too much on the CrossFit Open. We are making the assumption that the majority of people who follow it are going to be good enough to be flirting or at least, locking their place in for the quarterfinals. So some frequently asked questions I got asked a lot. Why do we need to split the year into training cycles? I think if you've been with us for some time, you will know that kind of every 6 to 12 weeks, when you look at that roadmap, we're starting new training cycles. So another question that kind of comes of this is like, why don't we just train hard and intense all year round? So if you look at something like CrossFit.com, who are putting out workouts every day, their kind of approach is we're always doing hard stuff all year round. And that can be really good. There's lots of advantages to that. It kind of keeps you fighting fit all year round. But it also does mean that you're working on everything all the time at the same time. And when you're trying to work on everything at the same time, what we typically see is that rates of progress are really, really slow, especially in something like CrossFit, where there are thousands of movements, thousands of modalities that we're trying to get good at. The whole idea of splitting the year into cycles is that rather than working on all 1,000 things at once, we pick anywhere between kind of 3 to 5 to 6 things, and we go a little bit more all in on those things and try and make some really good adaptations. And everything else that's not a priority in that phase kind of goes into maintenance mode. But then if you think about it over the year, when you're picking all these small little individual priorities and going all in, our general fitness is actually raising at a much, much quicker rate. And what we want is by the end of the year, when the competition rolls around in February, March, that's when we want things to be at their very, very best. So what that means is in the year, times like now, you should not be at your fittest. And I think that's something we just need to remind ourselves. The whole idea of the program is we want to be at our fittest, at our best come February, March time, which means that now, especially in some of these phases, there's going to be some movements, some aspects across it that we haven't really worked on very much. Maybe we've only just touched. And sometimes athletes kind of get a bit anxiety around that, and they think, holy shit, I haven't done much handstand walking, and I feel like my handstand walking's got worse. Or, I haven't done like high rep shoulder overheads, and I feel like that might have gotten worse. All I will say is that, that's intentional, right? Because we can't work on everything at once, there will be a time in the year where we will put more focus into that thing. And that's the whole idea of what these webinars and the education around what our program is about, to give you guys confidence to know that at some point in the year, moving up into the competition, we will have covered all of our bases. Last question that I often get, I get a lot more questions than this, but main question relative to what we're talking about today is, what if I want to compete mid-season? So right now, especially in the summer, especially here in Asia, there are competitions happening almost every week at the moment. Or we've got online qualifiers, we get asked the question, well, if the goal is to peak for the end of the year, well, then like, how do I do these competitions mid-season? What I will say is that the Compete in the Elite program should actually be keeping you relatively fit all year. So what I mean by that, it's giving you, especially those who follow the Elite program, who are getting multiple sessions a day, you are getting touches on most facets of the sport all the time, which means I really back for you guys. You should be able to step into a comp and be able to be relatively fit and have confidence that you've had exposure to most of the things that are going to get tested in a competition. So the Compete program, probably a little bit less. So what we say is that if you want to compete mid-season, and you get things like qualifiers come out or workouts are released ahead of time, we always recommend replace your Saturday testers with the competition specific work. That's a really, really good thing to do. Or of course, if there are elements or movements that are being tested in the competition when it's competing, you can always swap those movements out from the actual program itself. So for example, if the competition is testing a max snatch and you want to do that, you might slide that into your Wednesday session if you're on the compete program, or your Monday session if you're an elite, and kind of swap out your snatch work there. The end of the day, you're still snatching. But the main thing to remember is, if you are doing competitions mid-year, remember that you should not be at your fittest. So if you do the competition, you finish the comp, you feel like, I feel like I just was a lot fitter last year and did the quarterfinals. It's supposed to be like that, right? Because we cannot be at our very fittest all year round. And the main thing I want you guys to take away when we look at that roadmap is that when January rolls around, that's really the time of year where we need to have another gear to give. If you're someone who is targeting the semifinals and you know that there is a good chance that you're going to qualify to semifinals, then you guys need to be ready to give another gear at around February. We don't want to start cranking things up too much in January, because then that's a really long season for you to be working at that level. Hope that makes sense to you guys. Let's kind of dig into training phases a little bit more, because I talk about these things a lot. And I think it's really important that we're all aware of what the terminology means. So if you have a look down here on the left, these are some things that you're going to hear us talk about a lot: accumulation phases, intensification phases, competition prep phases, competition phases, and deloads or tapers. So I kind of just put this table together to kind of give you guys a rough idea of what we mean by this. And then the last column represents the percentage of each year that we spend in each of these training phases. So when we talk about accumulation, what we mean by that is our training looks less like the sport. We do more isolated movements, strength focus, slightly lower intensity. So what I mean by less like the sport, that will depend upon the athlete. So if you have an athlete whose goal is to peak for the CrossFit Open, the sport in the CrossFit Open looks like 3 weeks, one workout each week that you might repeat twice. You're working anywhere between 8 to 20 minutes. You might have one strength test, but otherwise you're probably going to see things like double unders, light barbells, wall balls, burpees, rowing, etc. So if that's a sport for a CrossFit Open athlete in an accumulation phase, they're not doing all that crazy stuff. They might be doing more like isolated strength movement, maybe working like longer, sustainable aerobic intensity work. Let's take, for example, someone who's looking to qualify to the quarterfinals. Quarterfinals is very different to CrossFit Open. We have 2 to 3 consecutive days where you're doing 2 to 3 workouts in a day. And we know that the movements that you're going to need to be good at are much more wide and encompassing. We may see things like kettlebells, GHDs, rope climbs. We know that to compete in the quarterfinals, you need to have high levels of absolute strength, so squat, bench, deadlift, but you've also got to have high levels of absolute strength speed, Olympic lifts like clean and jerk and snatch, and you got to be able to do repetitive, moderate to heavy loads of barbells as well. So you've got to be really fit and strong across the whole continuum. So if that's what the sport looks like as a quarterfinal athlete, then again, in the accumulation phase, it needs to look a little bit less like that. So accumulation phases is that intensification. Basically, think of an intensification phase as a more intense version of an accumulation phase. So our training looks a little bit more like the sport. So if you're that CrossFit open athlete in an intensification phase, we're probably going to be doing more metcons. We're probably going to be doing a little bit less strength work. We're probably going to be doing less isolated pull-ups and thrusters and more 2159 Fran type workouts. When we talk about competition prep phases, we're basically talking about the period of time leading into a competition. So basically, our training will replicate the competition that we're preparing for. So for those who are looking to crush the quarterfinals, 3 to 5 weeks out from the quarterfinals, we need to be doing things like simulation weekends, where we're doing a Friday, Saturday, maybe a Sunday, where we're doing multiple workouts a day, and we're exposing people to all the movements that might come up. That's what a competition prep phase looks like. At this point in time in a competition prep phase, health is probably like starting to dip a little bit. Niggles, injuries, burnout, those things are starting to go up a little bit because we're kind of in like fight or flight mode, survive mode then. And then, of course, we've got competition time. This is when training takes a backseat and the goal is to actually compete in the competition. So when we're in the middle of the quarterfinals, Monday to Wednesday, we're just trying to stay healthy, stay fresh, give ourselves touches and movements. Friday, Saturday, Sunday, we are, throwing everything into the competition. And then either everyone's favorite or everyone's enemy, deloads and tapers. That's basically a deliberate break or reduction in volume and intensity between cycles before and after competition. So when we look here in the last column, guys, at how we spend the majority of our time in the year, 45% of our time is spent in accumulation phases. Why? It's a really good chance for us to get some really good quality training in, whilst also avoiding things like burnouts and injury, overtraining, loss of motivation, etc. These are generally the times of the year where we should be a little bit healthier, should definitely be more pain-free, and levels of motivation should be a little bit higher. Intensification phases, also super important, but because they are a little bit more taxing on the body and the nervous system, we do them a little bit less, about 30%. Obviously, competition prep, competition and deloads, I've said 5 to 10%, depending on how much you actually compete. Some people only compete once a year. Some people do multiple competitions a year, which means they'll spend more time in those phases. A really important note here is that as we move closer to the competition or the peak, each preceding accumulation and intensification phase will look more like the sport. So what I mean by that, we started this season with a 12-week accumulation phase. That was the very first cycle we did. And we're about to go into another 12-week accumulation phase. But this accumulation phase is not going to look like the one that we did at the start of the season. You're definitely going to see a little bit more CrossFit in this cycle because we're getting a little bit closer to competition time. And when we go into an intensification cycle after this, it's going to look a little bit more intense than the intensification cycle we just finished. So as the whole year is progressing towards a competition, everything is getting a little bit more intense. And then when we start the new year, after the season finishes, we bring the intensity back down and then we rebuild up again. So if you think about what the training looks like over the year, it's kind of going through these cycles continuously. And every year you go through one of these cycles again, we want to come out of it just a little bit fitter, a little bit stronger than the previous year. And that is how we gain long-term progress when it comes to periodization in CrossFit. Does that make sense, guys? Awesome. Love it. Thank you to everyone who threw some thumbs up. Okay, so question, what should I prioritize at this point in the year? We're in August right now. I've just told you guys, when we need to be at our best and when we need to start to crank up things like conditioning intensity. We've actually got quite a bit of time. We still have the rest of August, which is actually only 5 days. That was a bad example. We got September, October, November, December. For those targeting quarterfinals, you've also got January, 5 months. You've also got half a year still before you need to start giving us another gear. So things I would say that we should be doing at this point in the year, I would say do 1 to 2 competitions. At the end of the day, we chose a sport and we love competing. I think it is actually really important to put yourself into the arena, especially those in our compete and elite programs who are signing up for the whole idea of competition. That's why you guys do this in some way, shape, or form. It might be a little local throwdown in your gym, which is just like, half a day. It might be a full day thing. It might be a team comp. It might be a 2-day weekend. It might be traveling overseas. But I do really think that getting competition experience is really, really important. And I would just urge you to not think about the idea of having to be ready to compete, which is something that kind of puts people off competing a lot. Truth be told, you're never really going to be ready. And every time, if you've ever competed in anything, you know that there's always so many learnings and takeaways that come from doing a competition. So, for everyone on this call who follows these programs, I really recommend booking yourself something in the year to give yourself that kind of more intense focus in the lead up to it. Do the competition, and I promise you will level up in some way, physically or mentally, from that experience. In terms of training, some important points to talk about right now at this point of year. I would say that we should really be prioritizing strength and our skills. All right. Now, some athletes are going to be so strong that they don't need to work on their strength at all, and they probably need to spend a bit more time working on their capacity. For most of us in the process programming, we don't really have anyone who kind of sits within that box. We have a couple for sure, but right now, prioritize being strong. The way that the sport is trending is the top athletes are just getting stronger and stronger and stronger. And the way that we have to respond to that is we need to keep up with the trend, the positive trends and strengths. And of course, things like skill. I know a lot of people, follow the compete and elite athlete, have been doing CrossFit for a bit longer. Maybe they have nice big repertoire of skills that they can execute well. But remember, there's a big difference between executing a skill well versus executing a skill exceptionally. And we should be on that journey of mastering skills as much as we can, because if you can master a skill more, that just means that you're more efficient with the movement. And if you're more efficient with the movement, it means you are burning less energy per repetition. And in CrossFit, that's really, really important. If you can expend less energy per rep, you have more energy to give to a workout. And that's often what equates to faster times, more load lifted, you name it. So as I said, December, January, maybe even stretch this to February if you're a semifinal athlete. That's when we have to have another gear to give. Then our focus will be maintain the strength that we've built up in the year, and let's focus a little bit more on conditioning and metcons. Cool. So if you are someone right now who is panicking a little bit and thinking that you need to be doing more metcons, or that you need to be fitter because you're not as fit as you felt before, just remember where we are in the year and what your priorities right now should be. Mads, I'm just looking at your dog on your screen and it's super cute. Okay, what else should we be focusing on right now at this point in the year? We've got to prioritize health. So this is not a time of the year where we want to be dealing with injuries or pushing through injuries or dealing with niggles that keep on coming up. Niggles, injuries, and pushing through those things, that is for sure something we have to do in things like competition prep phases and competition phases, because that's just a part of the parcel. You got to grit your teeth and just get through it sometimes. But right now, 4 to 5 months away, we don't need to be dealing with that. And if you do push through injuries and niggles right now, the likelihood is those things are not going to repair, they're not going to heal. And you're going to come into January when we need to give more intensity and another gear, and you're going to have nothing to give. And that's often where athletes will come into the competition season and just be beat up and broken and not have that extra energy to give. So, just make sure if that is you and you're hearing that and you're kind of resonating, thinking, yeah, that sounds like me, this is a great time to seek professional help, see physiotherapists, maybe take a reduction in volume or deload, or, reach out to one of the coaches for some help. With that, in the same breath, take the pressure off yourself. If you're someone who really thinks about performance, you're really hard on yourself, or you have big dreams and aspirations for yourself this year in the CrossFit Open quarterfinals and semifinals, it's really important that pressure is very powerful and can be a fantastic motivator to keep you going through the year and in competition. But I'd also say, don't keep that level of pressure on yourself all year round. This is a great time of the year to have other priorities, have other hobbies, have other interests. Fill your time with things that when the competition season rolls around in December, January time, you might push to the wayside. But if you are all in 100%, totally focused on competing and executing right now, the likelihood is when the quarterfinals and semifinals rolls around, again, you're just going to be burnt out. You're not going to have much to give. I think we just have to accept that no one can give 100% all year round. And if you think you're someone that can give 100% all year round, the likelihood is you're not actually giving 100%. Okay. I wanted to talk about this page real quick because this is quite interesting. I shared it with the guys on the call yesterday, which is basically talking about what movements are likely to show up in the CrossFit Open. So if you are in this call and you're thinking, well, I know the quarterfinals is not a guarantee for me. I need to be good in the Open if I want to qualify to quarterfinals. Then this page is super relevant for you because this basically breaks down, what movements typically show up in the CrossFit Open. So this is looking at all the statistics from 2011 up until last year and how many times these movements showed up. So, I mean, basic things like, I should not say basic because it's definitely not basic, but things like double unders, toes to bar, chest to bars, the more skill component movements that we see in the sport, those are things that have a tendency to show up every year. So those are the things we've got to be putting time and energy into now, right? If you're someone who can do all of the movements on here, then you need to ask yourself, can I improve technique and efficiency on any of these things? I'll take something like the shuttle run, for an example, which I have a feeling is going to show up again this year. We can all shuttle run, but the difference in what dictated how well people do on shuttle run workouts, we know is all in the turns. So if you can get really good and very efficient at turning on a shuttle run, that's going to be a lot more shuttle runs completed in a workout without actually having to be any fitter, if that makes sense. All right, so let's make sure we're kind of running through these with a fine comb, self-assessing and saying, all right, can I do any of these? What can I not do? If it's something I can't do, what is holding me back from doing it? Making sure that you're putting in the work to actually do it. Okay, I did a bit of research on, what do the strength numbers look like? So for athletes who want to compete the semifinals and even the CrossFit Games, this was some data that was collected based on some of the tests that showed up. Now, this is a little bit outdated. This is 2018 and 2020 based on the CrossFit Games athletes who actually competed. But the question was asked, how strong do you need to be to compete the CrossFit Games? And this basically took averages of the men and the women who competed at the Games in 2018 and 2020. So when we look at the CrossFit Games athletes, 2018, 2020, have a look at the averages here. This is what the average Games athlete can snatch: 285, clean and jerk 348, back squat 453, deadlift 528. Now, if that was 2020, 2023, I can promise you means that all those numbers are probably cranked up a good 2 to 5%. So when we look at the females, in the female category, the averages for the snatch is 188 pounds, clean and jerk 230, back squat 297, the deadlift 353. And sometimes people look at this and, it's very anxiety inducing because they feel like they're so far off from this. But I think it is really, really important to be honest about this, to know that, this is where the sport is trending. And if you have goals and aspirations to compete in things like semifinals, CrossFit Games, well, we know we've got to be hitting somewhere close to these numbers. Yes, you can be very, very exceptional in other areas that might, account for some lower levels of strength and still put you high up on the leaderboard. But generally speaking, strength is paramount. And we know that strength takes a long, long time to build. So because I know there's not that many people on this call who are targeting the Games right now, let's talk about the quarterfinals. If your goal is to compete and qualify in the quarterfinals, and I know those are two very different things, the minimums that I think we have to be able to do as athletes, snatching, clean and jerking, back squatting, and deadlifting are there. So men, you got to at the very least be able to snatch 185 pounds, women 135 pounds, clean and jerk 255 and 170, back squat 350, 235, deadlift 420 and 290. These are just my estimations based upon results that I've seen come through and where the tests are going. When we look at the semifinals, the question is, how strong do we need to be competing at the semifinals? These are numbers that I think are mandatory now for male and female athletes. As a male, we need to be, if we want to be competitive at semifinals, at the very least, we've got to be able to snatch 275, females 185, clean and jerk 350 and 220, back squat 450, 290, deadlift 500, 240. Okay, so I think it's really important to have these numbers in mind, and basically chart how far off, or are you already meeting these things? If you're meeting these numbers comfortably, well, maybe then the strength doesn't need to be your biggest priority. If you're a long way off these, then we know that that's something we've got to keep on working towards. We also have to understand, guys, that strength takes a really, really long time to develop. There are some people, and honestly, most people competing at the CrossFit Games, they come into training with very, very high levels of strength already. It's not uncommon. I mean, someone like, Travis Mayer, as a 21-year-old starting CrossFit, was already cleaning 170 kilograms. So, I think it's really important just to keep in mind that, like, the guys competing at that level are strong individuals naturally as well, coupled with some really hard work. That's why we're seeing the numbers go where they go right now. Okay, what movements do we think we're going to see this year? Obviously, it will depend on which competition you're peaking for, but I think it's really important to know what might potentially come up. And again, this is all just guessing, so I could be completely wrong. And making sure that you are exposing yourself to those movements. So for those who are targeting the CrossFit Open as their goal, well, we already looked at the movements likely to show up in the CrossFit Open, but let's have a look at this. Other movements outside of what was listed on that table. CrossFit Open, I have a strong feeling shuttle running is going to be here to stay. I know Bosman is a big fan of it, and they're able to finally test and express running. Handstands, even in the open, I think we might see things like freestands, pirouettes, freestanding handstand push-ups. I think kettlebells are going to show themselves this year. It was listed as an equipment requirement, but didn't actually show up in the tests. I think chest wall handstand push-ups, we saw that in quarterfinals last year. We've seen it tested very, very frequently at all competitions now. I think we'll see chest wall handstand push-ups come up in the open next year. Ring and bar gymnastics complexes, been giving you guys a bit of that on the program recently, but basically, no longer is it just going to be a chest to bar. We may see things like toes to bar into chest to bar into bar muscle ups. So I'm going to make sure I'm giving you guys exposure to that. And then skipping movements. I know Boz is a huge fan of skipping as a skill that we should be practicing. And right now we've seen the single unders, we've seen crossovers, and we've seen the double under crossovers. I do think things like double under crossovers might come into things like the open. We may even see things like backward skipping, triple unders. So I think it's really important that we are exploring the different aspects of skipping in our training. And skipping for me is something that's really easy. You just throw it into your warm-ups every day you train. Even just 5 minutes of skill work is enough that over time you can accumulate some really good skills. Let's talk about the quarterfinals. So of course, movements that might show up in the quarterfinals are all the ones included in the CrossFit Open. And as well, obviously things like GHD sit-ups. We may see an echo bike make an appearance this year. I have a feeling we may see that. Heavy med balls and a 10-foot target. So wall balls, ladies, we need to get used to throwing to a 10-foot target. I think that's going to be a staple in the quarterfinals. That's with regards to wall balls, of course. Obviously, rope climbs, and we know that rope climbs are now tested beyond just legless and foot clamps. We're now seeing legless descents. Not being able to let go of the rope under a certain height. So we've got to be practicing all those different variations of rope climbs. Handstands, the complexity, I think, is going to continue to grow. Freestyle handstand push-ups, for example, pirouettes, freestands, maybe even obstacles, going round cones, for example. I don't see why they couldn't test that. And again, like the skipping movements, double unders, crossovers, triple unders. Semi-finals, of course, this is where, it really opens up. But based on what we've seen in, this year, you've got to be good on all ergs. You've got to be good in the assault runner or being able to do like longer shuttle runs, strongman type equipment, high box jumps, weighted vest and ruck work. So again, maybe this is obvious for a lot of us, but I do think it's important because so often I see athletes whose goal is to peak for the CrossFit Open, and then they're spending most of their time doing weighted ruck and vest runs. And it's like, well, we're probably not going to see weighted vests and ruck runs show up in the CrossFit Open. So if your goal is the Open, let's prioritize the movements that are likely to show up there. Cool. So at this point in the year, our training is probably a little bit more varied, but as we get a little bit closer to the competitions, it's definitely getting a little bit more specific. So if you are a quarterfinal athlete, for example, and we follow the compete program, well, then we're not going to be doing things like assault runners we're probably going to be doing, and not going to be doing like long outdoor runs. We're definitely going to be doing more shuttle runs because that's what we're probably going to likely see in the CrossFit Open. Okay, cool. Let's quickly talk about what the next cycle looks like. So for the compete program, remember our goal is to peak for the quarterfinals. We are doing one session a day, 60 to 90 minutes per session based on whether or not you're doing accessory work. And we have 5 sessions a week. Our priorities in this next cycle are heavy Olympic lifting, upper and lower body, absolute strength. We're going to continue to work on absolute strength. Gymnastics capacity, specifically pulling gymnastics, we're going to put a bit more of an emphasis on, and shorter sprint style metcons. So we have a 12-week phase coming up. And there are going to be some priorities going to stay consistent across the entire 12 weeks. And we have some priorities which are going to change over the 6 weeks. So let's just talk about this. Super simple. Clean and jerk 1RM, snatch 1RM, front squat 1RM. I'm going to do a row 1 kilometer test. Horrible. Okay, reason being, guys, is in that last cycle, we did start to prioritize our Olympic lifting more, but it was only a 6-week cycle. So it was a pretty short cycle. And I know we did some testing on the snatch and clean and jerk. To be honest, the expectations weren't really to see people PRing, because 6 weeks in the grand scheme of what we've done this preseason is quite a short amount of time. However, we had a fuckload of PRs, which was really, really cool and really, really surprising. So all I can say is that, you know, another 12 weeks of consistency and building those even further. I'm really excited to see kind of where we end up at the end of 12 weeks. So in the first 6 weeks, we're going to do a 30 ring muscle up for time test. That's a staple that we have been testing, every year. And it's something we've seen show up at things like the games and lots of other competitions. And another test that we did last year is 100 chest to bars for time. We're not going to do these 2 things at the same time. We're going to split them up over the 12 weeks. Even the 12-week tests, we're not going to be doing all of these on the same week, because you are all going to be a complete mess if you do that. So we'll be kind of drip feeding those tests probably in like the final 3 to 4 weeks. And then for the elite program, our testing priorities are the same, but obviously our training options are much, much greater, because the elite program, we are doing 2 sessions a day, 60 to 90 minutes per session, 5 sessions a week. What the elite program will also be getting is more frequent touches on all of these things here. So they will be clean and jerking twice a week, snatching twice a week, squatting twice a week. So, that is just the benefit and the beauty of being able to train more and handle more volume. Because, you guys, if you can adapt to it, obviously it just, potentially seeing faster rates of progress. But if you're like me and you follow the compete program, don't fret, don't panic and think that you have to be doing more volume. Remember, it's about finding what works for you. You can still get really strong and really fit just doing 1 session a day. But for those who have the time, availability, and energy and goals to support 2 sessions a day, and if you can recover from it, then you guys always win. Okay, so nearing the end now. Question: how do I work on my weaknesses following a group program? So just a little reminder, I'm sure you guys all know this already, and if you don't, then I need to be better at communicating it. But remember, we have accessory programs. So twice a week, typically we program these on Mondays and Fridays. We have an Olympic lifting program. Strength and hypertrophy is what we call our general accessory, which is programmed every day. We've got endurance work and we've got gymnastics. So, if you guys do have specific priorities or weaknesses that you would love to put a bit more time and energy into, make sure that at least twice a week you're having a look at what is programmed on the Olympic lifting, endurance, and gymnastics programs. Those are always programmed, in accordance to what the main program is doing. So the main program for elite and compete will get written first, and then the accessory programs are written to support that. So you shouldn't see like double ups of movements and things like that. Another thing you can definitely do is you can always start your session with an accessory program. A lot of you guys and girls are kind of training at your own time. You're not training in classes. So you've got the luxury to kind of like pick and choose what you want to do and like shuffle your week around. Definitely, for example, if let's say strict handstand push-ups, I'll use my biggest priority. Strict handstand push-ups are the thing that I really need to work on, and I want to do the accessory program, which has strict handstand push-ups in. If I'm always doing my strict handstand push-ups at the end of my main session, I'm not going to have much energy and resources to give towards that work. So it might be a better idea for me to actually start my session with the strict handstand push-ups when I'm fresh and then get into my main session. So just want to kind of put that out there to you guys. Like you have total freedom to be able to do that kind of stuff. Of course, like if this is all really overwhelming and you don't know what the hell you should be doing, we do have the premium subscription for you, where a coach is assigned to you, and we can help through conversations, kind of like figure all this stuff out, and like build a bit of a plan in terms of like which sessions you need to hit and why, etc. If you're someone like me, who loves isolating skills and just, taking your time and focusing on quality and, perfecting technique, just remember that we can't do that forever. Sometimes we actually have to do the sport. So that's why we have things like Saturday testers in there all the time. Regardless of the training phase that we're in, we're going to throw some kind of like CrossFit tests at you guys at least once a week. Those in the elite program, you guys get more of it. And that just gives us that opportunity to do some crazy CrossFit every now and then, which is still important. Okay, this is a really important slide. I talked about this last time I did a webinar, and I know it hit home with a lot of people. But I want to go over it again. I know that we have a program that is set out on specific days. We have a training cycle that hits different things on different days. And a lot of people, when they join the process, or any program for that matter, feel obliged to have to follow what's been written for them. What I will say to you is that, the template, the program is there for you to follow, but sometimes we need to take responsibility to adjust that program to fit within our lives and our needs. Okay, so let's just kind of talk about some examples here. Firstly, is like I love to think of the program as like a jigsaw puzzle. So what you have at the start of every single week is you have your 100 pieces, and it's really down to you how you want to put those pieces together. So let me give you some examples. Monday for a lot of people, technically on our program, is the day where we think people should be at their strongest because they've just come out of a 2-day rest period. But for a lot of people, Mondays aren't actually the day they feel best. It's also often a day where we have lots of work meetings, like just getting back into the routine of work in general. Maybe you have other commitments on a Monday, which means that actually on Mondays, you generally feel a bit tired, fatigued, a bit shitty. And if you look at your program and you spend all your harder stuff as program, maybe that doesn't really make sense. Maybe what you need to do is actually slide an easier session into your Monday and do the really hard stuff on the program on another day, which suits you better. Because at the end of the day, guys, as long as we get the work done, it doesn't really matter too much about how we lay it up. Obviously, the way that we program it is we're trying to not do, consecutive movements on days, trying to change up, the intensities of different days. So we're not beat down by the end of the week. But at the end of the day, we've just got to make it work for ourselves. And if there's any part of you that feels guilty about doing that, because you feel like, well, I'm going against what the program's written, remove that from your mind. We totally, encourage you to self-regulate. We encourage you to make changes to the program and just make it work for you. Maybe some days you got less time to train. This is a super common one. Sorry, guys, just turn my light on. Maybe there's some days where you have, more time to train, and there's other days where you got less time to train. If the days that you got less time to train are the days that, are really lengthy training sessions, well, it doesn't make sense trying to squeeze those sessions into those days. It would make a lot more sense picking an easier session that you can just get done quicker. Maybe like an aerobic Tuesday session, which doesn't need too much warming up. You kind of just get into it straight away. Maybe that's a good session to slide into the days where you have less time. And maybe you've got something like a Saturday where you're not working, where you have like 3 hours in the gym. Maybe that's the day to put all the harder stuff, stack all that stuff on a Saturday so you can get that stuff done and not be worried about work or other commitments and other things. So yeah, I kind of just want to kind of just remind you guys about this because I think it's super important, right? Don't be rigid, be flexible, make it work for you. If you need to take an extra rest day and then stack 2 sessions on another day, that is totally okay. At the end of the day, it's not that one session that makes you fitter. It's the accumulation of the training over 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 years. That's where all the progress really lies. So don't stress about missing that one session or those 2 sessions or taking a week off or only hitting 50% of the work. Adding accessory programs, fixed length programs, kind of already talked about that. It is actually our goal this year to create more fixed length programs. What do I mean by that? It's kind of like 8 to 12 week training programs with a very specific goal. So we have intentions to be creating like absolute strength programs. So let's say you wanted to really work on your deadlift or your bench press. We already have a squat program. We want to create those for you. We want to create things like strict pull-up programs, strict handstand push-up programs, specific gymnastics. Oh, focuses that you guys can kind of just like bolt onto your training. So the goal is to create all of those, and we're kind of just slowly working our way through it. So if you guys, have a request of a specific program that you'd love to see, send it over to us. And we'd love to build out something for you guys. And that would just give you an opportunity just to further individualize your training. Okay, last one, power of environment. I think it's really important that we train with others every now and then. I know a lot of us kind of we have like garage gyms, or we train by ourselves in an open gym, and training with other people is something that's an absolute luxury, and the majority of the time is actually spent by ourselves. I totally understand that is just the way it is. And, hats off to you guys for, getting in and putting in the work, because I know that can be really challenging and very lonely sometimes. But I think we can all appreciate, the power of actually joining others every now and then. And what I will say, if that is one of you, if that is you and that resonates with you, then, see if you can find ways to, train with others every now and then. And if that means going off the program, let's say you're in a gym and there's a group of people doing something cool, but it's not what you have in your program that day, I would really recommend, if you can, use that opportunity, use that unique opportunity to jump in with other people and, get a fun session in where you're pushing each other, encouraging each other, or learning from each other while you're doing it. Going on a bit more with that, if there are certain things that you struggle with by yourself. So for example, if I'm going to do a Metcon by myself, I'm going to sandbag the fuck out of that workout, let's be honest. But if I'm doing a Metcon with, the other coaches or other people in the program, then the likelihood is that I'm going to push a lot harder. Same if I have to do like Olympic lifting. Like if I'm going to do Olympic lifting, I'm probably going to max out at 75%. If I'm doing it with other people, then there's a much higher opportunity that I'll probably push it to 80%. I'm just basically preempting Ant's gag because he's getting excited about shouting out how weak I am. But the whole idea there is like, identifying what you struggle with and what you need, where you need an environment, and maybe trying to kind of like organize those get-togethers on the day where it's doing something that's really that you need. So yeah, really, again, very similar to that last page. It's like, you guys have our full support if you need to go off the program, if you need to do something a bit different, because you have those unique opportunities to train with other people or to do something different. Saturday tests as an example. Really, what we're trying to do, guys, is just get some like hard conditioning in you. So if you want to be a part of jump in a class, jump in a group workout where they're doing something different, but it's still the similar idea of what we're trying to achieve, then you have my full support. And of course, if you're just looking for more like-minded people to train with, or follow the same program, we do have a growing community of affiliates who are running the Compete program in their gyms. And a lot of these places have elite athletes or people following the elite program who kind of train in open gym times. So, these are our affiliates. If there's anyone near you, then, hit them up and see if you can drop in. If there are no affiliates near you, then I promise at some point in the future, there will be, because we are bloody taking over the world. But yeah, sorry, we don't have that just yet. Or of course, our doors at Coastal Fitness are always open. So, if you guys overseas would like to have a little holiday to Hong Kong, we would love to have you in, train with the team, hang out with the team. Our doors are open all year round. So if that was something you're thinking about, then, I really, really encourage it, and we would love it. Okay. And that's a wrap, guys. I'm gonna turn off my share and just come back to you guys on Zoom. This is an opportunity to ask any questions if you have any. If you came in halfway on that call and you missed some of it, no worries at all. As I said, it's all been recorded, and we're going to put this up on YouTube, and you guys can kind of watch it over, share it with your friends and family if you'd like. So yeah, no stress there. But does anyone have any questions? I mean, we don't normally have questions, guys. I don't feel bad about not asking anything. I normally just sit here in silence for about a minute, and then I conclude it. Are we sure? No questions.
How many strict handstand push-ups can you do?
How many strict handstand push-ups can I do? Right now, and not many, because I haven't really been working on it, to be honest. But would you like to know my PR from like 2018?
Yeah, please.
My PR, everyone, was 13 strict handstand push-ups, and that was with basically a trampoline under my neck. So I kind of cheated. So probably less than that, if I'm honest.
Thanks. Just wondering.
Hey, thank you for the question. Does anyone
So
else?
what's yours, Ant? I want to know Ant's handstand push-ups.
No, Jonas, you're supposed to ask him about a movement he's shit at, not something he's good at.
Okay.
More than double ends.
All right.
On a bad day.
Okay, well, I do have one more request, guys. If we have no more good questions, I would love everyone to turn on their cameras to me because we're going to take a nice big group photo to finish. So come on, everyone.
Come on, ladies.
Let's go, Zav. Mars, I promise it'll be quick. You won't get in trouble from your boss.
Mine's on. It's just I'm in bed. It's like 11 o'clock here.
All right, thanks, Zav. I don't want to disrupt your light cycles. Come on, pal. Mars, I know you can't do it. Okay, guys, big smiles. 1, 2, 3. Legends. Guys, thank you so much for tuning in. Really cool. Hang on. So we got to do. Oh no, he's gone now. Pal turned his camera on after the photo. Guys, best of luck in new cycle on Monday. I'll be sending through a big write-up of what the program looks like, what we're going to be doing on every single day. If you have any questions regards to details, you can fire them through on the water cooler in the comments, or of course, reach out to me or any of the coaches. But very good to see all your lovely faces, guys. Thank you for all the love and support that you give us. And yeah, have fun in this next cycle. Farewell, everyone. Good morning or good night, wherever you are in the world.